Welcome to Municipal Affairs Year in Review. This past year, our cities across Canada have been at the forefront of some of the most pressing issues of our time. From navigating the financial ripple effects of economic uncertainty to embracing innovation in infrastructure and housing. All the while, these big cities have proven that they are more than just the closest to the people. They are the problem solvers, the innovators, and often the ones who make things happen when higher levels of government fall short. And joining me today to look back at 2024 in Canada's largest cities is the chair of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Big City Mayors Caucus, London Mayor Josh Morgan. Are you passionate about local governance and municipal issues? Do you believe in the power of community-driven conversations? Then join us at the Cross Border Network, where we bring together voices from across Canada to shine a spotlight on the challenges and the triumphs of our municipalities. But we need your support to keep the conversation going. Visit crossborderinterviews.ca today to show your support by backing the show monthly or making a one-time annual donation. Your contribution will help us grow and expand our reach, bringing important stories to even more listeners across the nation. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can amplify the voices of local communities. Together, we can shape a brighter future for all. Cross Border Network, where local matters and your support counts. Visit us today at crossborderinterviews.ca. Mayor Morgan, thank you so much for sitting down with me today and talking about the last 12 months in Canada around our big cities and heading into 2025 and what's in store for our big cities in Canada as well. I want to start by asking you a simple question. How would you describe the state of our big cities at the end of 2024?
Well, the big cities are challenged, right? Not only have many of them experienced tremendous growth over the last number of years, but we know that our revenues are stretched. We know that there's significant upward pressure on property taxes. We know that although other levels of government, as the economy grows and the people have more sales tax coming in and income tax coming in, our revenues are relatively flat, despite the fact we've seen what many Canadians have seen, and that's the cost of actually doing the things that we need to do, like build roads and sewers and water infrastructure, all go up dramatically, like the cost of everything has gone up. So the state of Canadian municipalities at the moment, including large cities, is very fiscally stretched, with very significant pressure on property taxes, which is why we've been talking throughout the entire year about a new partnership with other levels of government to look at the way that municipalities are funded. The property tax system in most provinces is 100 to 150 years old, and it's not the way that modern cities are built. So, we're doing great things. We're building housing. We're trying to help with the significant challenges that the country is facing. We're on the front lines. We recognize that, but we've got significant challenges and significant pressures right now in this high growth, high cost era.
From your perspective, do you see any movement in 2024 to help address some of those situations, or are we heading into 2025 with the same issues that we were heading into 2024 with?
I think depending on where you are in the country, you've seen a little bit of movement. I think some of the provinces are definitely at the table with municipalities talking about the way that we fund infrastructure, particularly housing enabling infrastructure, right? There are significant alignment of priorities between municipalities and other levels of government. We know that housing and housing affordability is really critical. We know that there are significant challenges with homelessness, mental health addictions, the opioid crisis, and we know that there's a crime problem in across the country. And so we've been in great discussions with our provincial counterparts, had good discussions with the federal government, and I've never seen a time in my time as an elected official where all of the priorities seem to be aligned. We just have to figure out how we can work together to do things. Housing has been a great example. every level of government is on the same page for let's build as much housing as we possibly can because we recognize housing costs are way too high. Now, let's find ways to make housing more affordable, speed up processes, and bring new units to fruition as quick as we can. Municipalities stand beside our provincial and federal counterparts to do that. So, I think that they are listening. We have good partnerships, but the one part where we are significantly challenged is we have a completely different revenue structure than other levels of government, right? I already mentioned before, we really, are dependent upon property taxes, which is a very old and archaic form of funding modern cities. We got user fees and then government grants. And so for, of every tax dollar collected in this country, we collect about 9 or 10 cents. But we're responsible for about 60% of the infrastructure. And that infrastructure needs to be maintained. It's costly, and the cost of building new infrastructure is much higher than it used to be. So, we need support. We are dependent upon other levels of government, and that's the reality of today, and will be the reality through 2025 as well.
What do you say to your to those, and I'm going to point out one person in particular, the leader of the official opposition in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, recently made headlines when talking about municipalities and infrastructure funding. And I'm quoting him here, and I'm going to quote exactly as he was reported. Municipal governments don't ever let them bullshit you, are bursting with cash and they're wasting it all. Are municipalities, are big cities wasting the money?
No, we're not wasting monies at all. We're the most efficient level of government, and we have to be. And I'll tell you why. It's because unlike other levels of government, we can't just borrow to expand or fund programs or send out checks to everyone. Like we can't do that, right? We don't have the legal capacity to just borrow when we can't make ends meet. Our budgets are balanced each and every year. So if cost goes up, we can't hide that in budget deficits. We can't hide that with borrowing. It is very transparent that costs go up. Where we do have to have some cash reserves is because unlike other levels of government where we can just run deficits, we actually have to set money aside for our unfunded liabilities. We have retirement benefits. We have obligations in water and wastewater that we have to meet legally. We have a number of other contractual arrangements that we actually have to come through on. And then we have our existing debt and debt servicing. So yes, we might have hundreds of millions of dollars in a reserve fund, but we have more than that in liabilities. And if we were to just spend that on whatever we felt like, those costs, those liabilities are not things that we can make a policy change to get out of or make a decision of council to remove. They basically mean significant future property tax increases to cover those liabilities when they come due. So whereas it may seem like we have some cash on hand, what we're doing is what we're forced to do and responsible is we got to put the money aside for the bills that we know we have to pay. And so if the solution that is being said is go spend the money that you've set aside for the bills that you know are coming due, what do you want us to do when those bills come due, right? That's the challenge we're in. So, we can't hide our fiscal reality. We can't run from it, and we can't borrow our way out of it, and we can't run deficits. So it's very transparent where we stand, and we have to save for things. Like, you know what? We got to save for things we know we got to build. So that means we do have reserve funds, and we save over time to make sure that when the project comes up, or when the federal and provincial governments say, we're willing to fund this infrastructure project, but you got to kick in 33%. Well, we have that money on hand to be able to participate in that arrangement because we put money aside over time in a responsible way to participate in the priorities of all those levels of government. So I don't think it's municipalities flush with cash. It's municipalities being one of the most fiscally responsible levels of government, and unable to hide the reality of their fiscal situation through borrowing or deficit.
Over the last year, I've spoken to many of the Big City Mayor Caucus members on this show and my other show, and in person at some conventions. And one of the things I'm hearing over and over again is the offloading of responsibilities onto the municipal government, whether it be housing, whether it be social services. How much does that play into the budgetary process in the larger cities? Because you're now responsible for things that the provincial government or even the federal government were once responsible for, and now are passing the buck to municipalities. Does that play into that financial situation that you were just talking about as well?
Absolutely, 100% it does. And it does so in a direct way and an indirect way. So directly, there may just be responsibilities that are downloaded to municipalities that we have to pay for. I'll give you one example in the province of Ontario, because that's where my city is. The province brings forward statutory exemptions, so mandatory exemptions that we have to grant for certain types of housing. purpose-built rentals, affordable housing. The legislation says we cannot just underfund the development charges fund to provide those exemptions. We actually have to put the money in the fund. So developer gets the exemption, someone's got to pay the bill. The legislation says we have to fill it up. So we basically have to raise property taxes to pay for those exemptions and put them in the development charges fund so that the infrastructure money is there so that when we need to go and build a stormwater management pond, we actually have the money to be able to do that. That is in the city of London. A few years ago, it was about $3 million a year. Last year, it was almost 28 million. Like a significant ramp up of these costs that we have nowhere to go but property taxes and user fees because the government grants aren't coming through to pay for those exemptions. The other way that this happens in a much more softer way is a level of government like a provincial government will exit a service that is in their responsibility. And then what we'll have is a lineup of services or agencies or individuals at the council chamber to say, we see this as a valuable program that was helping people in our community. We need you to pay for it now, right? It might be in the areas of homelessness. It might be in food security. Always usually very meritorious stuff, like things that are very hard to say no to because it impacts people right out the front door and on our streets. Not our responsibility at all, but we get this tremendous pressure to backfill programs that are exited by other levels of government because they were benefiting members of our communities. And because we're the easiest level of government to find, like, I go grocery shopping in the grocery store and I'm at Walmart and I'm pretty easy to find. You can walk right into the council chambers and you can delegate at a meeting anytime. When's the last time that happened provincially or federally? You get these voices and this pressure directly on municipal councils, and that can cause a number of cities to take on some of those responsibilities that really we were never meant to take on because the public wants us to, because another level of government has exited it. We try to resist that in the city, but it creeps in from time to time over time where municipalities are doing many things that they were never meant to be responsible for.
So how do we fix this solution? Because anytime I speak to a municipal leader, they always tell me, if you have an issue, come to me with a solution. So what's the solution here? Is it a new fiscal framework that the FCM has been calling for? Is it just sitting down with the premiers and the federal government to have that conversation about what jurisdictional roles each one of the levels of government play? Or is there a silver bullet in this whole scheme that big cities are looking at in 2025 to say, if we want to get this solved, if we want our big cities to thrive, you need to help us?
Yeah, no, it's a conversation because although we have some ideas on what the solutions could be, I think, given the complexity of the federal system that we live in, there's going to be lots of different suggestions on how to do it. I'll give you a couple of examples on how we could proceed. First off, we don't want taxes to be raised, right? We're not asking to say raise some taxes and give us more money. What we're talking about is the imbalance and the fact that municipalities do not participate in economic growth in any meaningful way from a revenue perspective. If in the city of London here, we're one of the biggest per capita contributors to GDP, and wages are going up, and people are spending more money, and sales taxes are being collected, none of that comes back to the city. It doesn't increase property taxes, doesn't increase user fees, and it doesn't increase government grants unless they decide to share a little bit of that money. So why not have high growth municipalities or municipalities that are growing participate and benefit from some of that growth that's occurring across the country? Why not have a revenue stream that can be transferred to us so that we're incentivized to say, we want to grow our revenues. Let's get people in our city to be paid more. Let's grow our economy. Let's get some economic activity here. No municipality is incentivized that way. We usually do it because we know it's the right thing to do for our residents and businesses, but it certainly doesn't help us pay for things in a growing city. And so we have all of these costs of growth, but when that growth comes and all the revenues associated with that growth, we have very limited ability to partake in the benefits of that growth financially, which puts tremendous pressure on us. So that's just one example of a way that we could solve this problem is having a discussion about how could we participate in a growing economy and a growing country more meaningfully from the revenue side of things. It could also be taking things off our plate, right? You could look at what levels of government are best suited to fund what things. The biggest cost in every municipality is policing, right? It's 21% of my budget. Policing is generally pretty similar across this country, right? And in rural municipalities, they have shared policing, whether it's the provincial police or the RCMP, depending on the province. We've got cities like London that have their own police force. We had the recently provincial government start to recognize that the cost of policing has gone up dramatically, and maybe we should assist or take some of that burden off of municipal plates. I could tell you if they did that in the city of London, if the costs of policing were uploaded across this province, it would be a 21% tax reduction on the property tax side of things, and that would still be funded, but through income and sales taxes. And we have to have conversations to say, are there things that should be taken off of the municipal plate to try to give them a little more fiscal capacity so that they don't have this upward pressure on property taxes? And so, I'm not saying all the costs of policing should be uploaded, but yeah, that's the kind of discussion we have to have is what do you want cities to do? What do you want the provinces to do? And what do you want the federal government to do? And then how do you best resource them to do that really effectively and efficiently? I don't think the most efficient way of funding infrastructure in this country is for municipalities to wait for a government to come along that wants to put an infrastructure program forward that we have to apply to and basically go through all the strings attached. If we have strategic priorities for our city that we've come up with in consultation with our residents, we should be able to fund them, not chase the dollars with a lower priority project because that's where the money is. It's just not an efficient way of growing and building a modern city. It's not the way you do it with your household budget, but it's the way we do it in the way that we fund municipalities across this country.
There's been a lot of demand on the big cities across Canada around policing over the last year, and that whether it be the repeat offenders who are getting put into or getting caught and then getting put out on the streets 2, 3 weeks later, or even the same day, from one mayor I spoke to just recently. That's a federal issue. Municipalities are the creatures of the province. You do have FCM, which you do advocate to the federal government. I know you were just in Ottawa recently. Did you hear anything from the Minister of Justice or anyone in cabinet around the issue of trying to help reduce some of those policing costs? Because if there's more crime, you need more police. If there's more police, it does come to cost you.
Yeah, so we have, and we started those discussions. Actually, FCM, although traditionally we haven't had substantive amounts of policy on crime, at the most recent meeting, actually passed new policy resolutions to come up with new lobby positions to engage with our federal and provincial partners. Although FCM is a national organization, we do liaise and have partnerships with each of the provincial and territorial associations and work with the provinces because some of these issues are all three levels of government, right? So yes, absolutely, we're having those discussions, and we have discussions not just with the government, but with opposition members and leaders as well, because we recognize that there's, in my province, there's going to probably be two elections this year, right? So there'll be a provincial one and a federal one, and so from our perspective, we want all parties to have great policy related to municipalities. And if parties have ideas that they say, we think that this is something that we'd like to move forward with, what's the impact on municipal governments? How could you actually help execute these programs? And what would you need to do so? We always stand by saying we're willing to have a conversation with any party, any leader to talk about those issues and how we can be part of bringing federal priorities to fruition on the ground. Because I think every government in Canada's history has been dependent upon municipalities to deliver on their goals and their plans. And we stand ready to do that. But we've got to have a conversation on how we do that efficiently and effectively. And we've got to have a conversation about there's just one taxpayer. So to have one level of government handing out checks or two levels of government handing out checks by borrowing to do so, and another level of government having a shortfall and having to raise property taxes, we're just making the public the middleman here. And that's just frustrating for members of the public because it's their wallets at the end of the day that matter, and we just want to have a meaningful conversation about how to do this really efficiently with the different orders of government that exist in this country.
But a conversation is a two-way streak. You need two partners at the table to have that conversation. Do you think, and I'm going to ask you this from an Ontario perspective and then from a chair of the Big City Mayors Caucus perspective, do you believe municipalities are being heard by the provincial and federal government from an Ontario perspective and then from your members' perspective, as you sit around that table in the Big City Mayor Caucus?
No, absolutely. I think from the provincial perspective here in Ontario, I think the current government is listening to municipalities. I mean, they're not doing everything we want. There's lots of things that we ask, but on some big issues, we've even established a Team Ontario approach in some federal advocacy where municipalities have stood by provincial cabinet ministers and mayors have done that and advocated for changes that we feel we need in the province of Ontario. That includes things like bail reform, like you were talking about. Municipalities and the provincial government here in Ontario are pretty aligned on some changes we'd like to see legislatively to assist with how crime works and how we're able to deal with it in this particular province. So I actually think on some issues, there's very, very close alignment and even a team approach to our advocacy and our work together. On other issues, there's not, right? There's differences of opinions, and even the mayors on some issues, they just don't agree, right? We've got 29 members of the big city mayors caucus in Ontario. I mean, there's 23 national big city mayors because the population sizes are different for the groups. But we don't always agree on what the overall priorities are, but we're consensus-driven groups. So when we find something that we all pull together on, sometimes we can get the province on board on that, and sometimes we're advocating together. And it goes the other way. Sometimes municipalities are advocating at the federal level down to the provinces when the federal government flows some much needed money through provincial transfer payment agreements. We work with the federal government to say, can you try to help make sure that there's some strings in there to get that money onto the ground in municipalities where it can be done, rather than just leave it up to the provinces to distribute. So we worked with both. I think we've been heard by both on different issues at different times. And I think on the fiscal framework piece, I think everybody understands that the status quo isn't working. I mean, I don't think anybody is not recognizing that municipalities across this country have
Can
been
I challenge you on that for a
yeah.
second, Mayor Morgan?
No,
I
go ahead.
apologize. I apologize immensely because I would agree that everyone agrees. But why hasn't the conversation happened then? Why hasn't the conversation where the federal and the provincial government, is it because our partisan politics federally and provincially are so dysfunctional right now? And that's me saying this, not the mayor, that's me saying this,
Yeah.
that no one wants to have that conversation because it might be a win for someone. And politically, that's just not where we are in this timeline right now.
Yeah, so why hasn't the conversation happened? It hasn't happened naturally, and it's only recently this year that municipalities have banded together to say we need to try to force the conversation. In our discussions with the Prime Minister, for example, he said, I'm happy to have the conversation. Can you get some premiers in the room? Right? I might not need all of them, but let's get a few and let's start this. There's a couple of premiers who've said, yeah, I'm willing to come to the table, but how many other premiers are coming to the table, right? Is this actually something that's going somewhere? The nature of the federation and the partisan politics at other levels does absolutely play into it and sometimes slow things down. And when there are elections on the horizon, I mean, everything gets more complex. That's a huge challenge for us. I love being at a level of government where there aren't political parties, where we just go out and talk to the citizens and come up with ideas that they like, that they feel is right for our city. But when you get into the partisan politics environment, especially leading into an election, you're right. People don't want to give each other wins. Right. And so, and often what we see, and I always find this funny, is one level of government will cancel a program and then they'll come back with the same elements of the same program branded a different way because it's now their idea, right? At the end of the day, we couldn't care less what a program is called as long as it's helping us achieve the goals that we need to achieve. So we got to play that game a lot of the times too. And on this, like, I actually do think all the parties understand the challenge. Now, are all the parties and all the levels of government going to come together and shake hands and hug and say, here's a great solution we all came up with? No, it's going to be an exceptionally difficult conversation. And it may actually look different in different provinces. And it may be provincial municipal relationships evolve out of this and the federal piece comes later. But it's a conversation that absolutely has to be had, and we're not moving away from it. Like we see the pressure that our residents are facing from a property tax perspective, and we're going to fight for them to try to get the fair share for municipalities in this federation, because we are under-resourced for the really important things that we're obligated to do. And we're talking about like things when you wake up in the morning, you touch multiple municipal services. You flush your toilet, you get a glass of drinking water, you put out your garbage, you walk out on your street, you drive by your park or your community center. These are the types of things that we're trying to fund here. Police, fire, a land ambulance, like the types of things that you're absolutely dependent on, right? We're not asking for a bunch of new services that are frills. We're asking to try to have the resources to fund the basic services that have gone up in costs that everybody depends on each and every day.
Looking towards 2025, I'm cautious of time. I have two questions for you left, Mayor Morgan. And the last one before before I wrap up is, what's your hope for 2025? If there was one issue you would be able to get off your table from a big city mayor's perspective, what would that issue be?
Well, I mean, if you make me pick one, that's going to be difficult because,
Okay, pick the top two.
all right. Well, first, I'm going to tell you why this is a good question. Elections are opportunities, right? Elections are huge opportunities. Although they can be frustrating, they can slow things down. You got every party right now saying, what sort of policy can I come out with that is going to win the hearts and minds of Canadians or people in a province, that's going to get me the votes to win, right? And so that is a massive opportunity for making serious change on what we need to be done. So I would say, a couple of the top priorities here are we need an absolute multi-governmental approach to dealing with homelessness, mental health, and addictions. Like full stop. Like no level of government can do it on their own, and municipalities absolutely have no capacity to solve this challenge on our own. So we've got to get ahead of that because it holds back everything else. Economic development, success of the individuals in our city, everything is held back if we cannot solve that problem. And then affordability, particularly just, from our perspective, housing affordability is a big challenge, but general affordability in our country is a huge challenge right now. And that includes the affordability of municipalities to be able to provide services. We don't want to be on the wrong side of the affordability equation because we got to push up property taxes to fund essential services. So that becomes a really critical conversation for us because I think these are places where every level of government is aligned. I don't think anybody doesn't think that these are really critical issues. I'd probably throw in some crime issues in there too that I think we all agree on. But if we all agree on the issues like we never have before, and there's opportunities for new policies and new ideas to come up in election, I got a lot of optimism about 2025 that we can have some really meaningful conversations if Canadians will go out there and help us drive them, right? When people come and knock on your door, these are the types of things you got to ask. What are you going to do for me, and what are you going to do for my community, right? That's how change happens. And what we're going to do is we're going to work behind the scenes and we're going to be very transparent out with the public to say, these are what we see as the priorities and the things that need to be discussed from a municipal perspective. There's always going to be other issues that other levels of government will want to talk about, but these are the big municipal priorities. And we'll put those out in our comprehensive platform documents. And we're going to go to Canadians this time too and say, help us make this part of the conversation. These are things that affect your everyday life, and we need your help with it.
Are you hopeful? I know you said you were, but are you actually hopeful that in 2025, Canadians will hear the rally call and actually come to municipalities' defense? Because I've spoken to many mayors and councillors from across Canada, and they say there's an apathetic nature when it comes to municipalities, and the issues that are there are just not being heard by them. Do you have hope that it can be heard in 2025?
Yeah, I'll tell you how I turn that into hope. There's a lot of angry people. Like people are pretty frustrated with their quality of life right now, and you can sit back and say people are frustrated. They're going to be apathetic. They might not show up, or you can go out there and say, yeah, it's okay to be angry, but how are we going to change that anger into the actual change that you want to see to make your life better? Here's some ideas we have. Like, do you want to rally together on this? And we'll see what we can do. And there's big opportunities with your voice mattering and counting here in these elections. I mean, in Ontario, in the next year, we're going to have a provincial and a federal election, I would expect. I would expect we have both. So there's a huge opportunity to reset the conversation here, and get some anger out maybe at the polls if you need to, but you can't stop there. You got to talk about the things you want in this province and this country, and you got to be vocal about it, because we will stand as municipalities beside you, pushing your voice during these elections, and then after it's done, guess who's going to be your advocates on your behalf to try to get things for your communities? It's going to be the mayors and the councils who are going to go out there and hold other levels of government to account to say, you promised to do these things. We're a partner. Like, let's get them done now.
Mayor Morgan, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about these issues. Looking forward to continuing this conversation potentially in 2025 and see you in Ottawa for the FCM conference there. So thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much for tuning in for our first of our last 5 episodes of 2024 here on Municipal Affairs. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our great interviews that we have coming up this week and our return in 2025. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll be back tomorrow with a brand new episodes looking back on 2024